Well, thank you for that warm greeting, and it's an honor and a pleasure to address you. The topic I was assigned today was Islamophobia and the challenges of pluralism. And I think those two subjects do go together. We've seen a very unfortunate tendency in the United States towards prejudice towards Muslims. And it, of course, had something to do with the September 11th attacks. But actually, I think those were not the main engine behind this phenomenon, because opinion polling in 2002 showed 63% of Americans thinking well of Islam. And that number has plummeted since then. So how could it be, if 9/11 were the cause for this, that in the aftermath of 9/11, so many Americans thought well of the religion, and yet now, with the passage of time, the numbers have sunk to the point where one poll suggested a quarter of Americans say they wouldn't like to live next to a Muslim. This is a kind of residential segregation that's being spoken of that we thought, we had gotten rid of in 1964 with the efforts of Dr. Martin Luther King and others. That is now being applied to Muslims. And it's wrong-headed in so many ways. First of all, Muslims are, in the United States, are better educated and better off than the general run of people. So if you could manage to live next to a Muslim, you'd be doing well for yourself. It's a self-defeating kind of attitude. In my view, one of the engines of this tendency towards prejudice against Muslims in the United States is political. And I don't want to single out one particular party over another, because this problem does exist across party lines. However, it is also the case that some prominent Republicans have taken up this cause. And I think because they were the kind of people that used to get elected by making Americans afraid of communism. And Dick Nixon started that way. It was always a little bit silly, because I think at its height, the American Communist Party had 50,000 members. It wasn't actually very likely that the communists would menace you in most of the country. But the politicians were running it on this platform of being against communism in the Cold War. And of course, again, this is something that Democrats did as well. But I think that the end of the Soviet Union, the disappearance of a geopolitical enemy like the Soviet Union, gave the politicians an impetus to try to find something else to scare people with. Because you can get elected to office in all kinds of ways. You can get elected to office promising positive change. You can get elected to office promising education. But you can also get elected to office by promising to protect people from an imagined danger. And we see this, we see not only ideological kinds of elections, but we also see people running for office. Famously, George H.W. Bush, the Bush Sr., had a campaign manager in 1988 who said he was going to strip the bark off of Mr. Dukakis, the Democratic opponent, and make him the running mate of a murderer, an African American who had been released on parole in Massachusetts. So, and the television commercials followed through on that threat. So I think that some of the challenge of prejudice against Muslims is coming from people like Peter King. There was this big controversy this past year over the Park 51 proposed Muslim community center, which was not at ground zero and was not a mosque, but which was depicted by Pamela Geller and others as a desecration, if you will, of white Christian Holy Land. That was really the way that it was formulated. I believe that campaign was picked up and run with by Rick Lazio, a Republican gubernatorial candidate, who came on CNN and said that the imam of this proposed community center should be investigated for ties to Iran. And a lot of prejudice against Muslims really depends on ignorance, because the imam was a Sunni of Egyptian extraction brought up in Kuwait, and Iran is Shiite, and it would be giving money to him. Why? But Lazio doesn't know or care. And I noticed that when Lazio lost the gubernatorial nomination in the Republican Party for governor of New York, all of a sudden that issue went away. So I think that some of this hysteria that you see on, and the news organizations like CNN are, I think, irresponsible in being willing to allow themselves to be whipped into a frenzy and give this kind of issue 24/7 coverage for this reason. Another place the prejudice against Muslims is coming from is, quite frankly, the evangelical community. And again, I want to be careful to say that there are many good-hearted evangelicals. There are people like Rick Warren doing God's work who have reached out to Muslims. But the opinion polling shows a really radical difference in attitude towards Muslims among evangelicals and among all other Americans. There's a prejudice there. And some evangelical leaders, and remember that many evangelicals are not churched in a traditional sort of way. You have televangelists, you have people who are kind of flying by the seat of their pants, cult leaders that the congressman referred to. But John Hagee, who was an extremely influential man of the evangelical right, a televangelist in Texas, actually went on Terry Gross's show on NPR, Fresh Air, and alleged that ordinary everyday Muslims are commanded to kill Christians and Jews. That Islam is a murder factory. And that this libel has been taken up and used by opponents of mosque building, because the allegation is then that the mosque will train people to want to kill Christians and Jews. And Hagee gets this weird idea because, as we all know, the Quran forbids qatl, which is murder. And in fact, Islam was the only religion that I know of in the medieval period that explicitly gave rights of life and property to non-believers. That is to say, if you were in Europe in 1350 and you declared you were Jewish, you'd have to be expelled from that country where you were, and your property would be taken away from you. If you declared in Spain in 1350 that you were Muslim in certain parts of Spain, that would be the end of you. But at the same time, in 1350, in Baghdad and Cairo and so forth, there were flourishing Jewish and Christian communities where the authorities explicitly protected the rights to property and life of these minorities. So what Hagee is saying is ridiculous, both historically and textually. It bears no relationship to reality. It is a kind of new blood libel, because, you know, in the medieval period, the Christians accused Jews of stealing Christian babies and using their blood in strange rituals. And this idea that Muslims are commanded to murder people is likewise a kind of similar libel. I take it that Hagee is misreading things like Surah Al-Anfal, the chapter of the spoils in the Quran, which is about Muslims having been attacked by the Meccan pagans and being ordered to defend themselves on the battlefield. Something that, you know, if defending yourself on the battlefield isn't an American value, I don't know what is. But this has been being misinterpreted because the word for the Meccan pagans is infidels, and sometimes people refer to Christians and Jews as infidels, and therefore, if the Quran says the infidels should be fought and killed, therefore Christians and Jews should be killed. Actually, there's a verse in the Quran that talks about the infidels from among the Christians and the Jews. Logically speaking, there's only one way to interpret that, which is that the Quran doesn't consider Jews and Christians to be infidels in general. There's some subset of them that were, I suspect, the ones that had allied with the pagans in Mecca militarily. So between the politicians who are on the make and who want to whip up anti-Muslim sentiment to get elected, to make people afraid, and the evangelical preachers who want to fill their congregations with people by whipping up an imaginary enemy, the poor Muslims are now in the crosshairs of American public life. Now, I don't want to talk more about Islamophobia, as unfortunate as the phenomenon is, and as much as it does impact the Muslim American community. But let me turn a little bit to the issue of pluralism. And let me say that, anything that happens in life, you can take it in a lot of different ways, but you haven't always an opportunity to make the best of it. And one of the things that the Muslim American community is going to have to do, it seems to me, is to get more active. I'm so glad we're in the presence of someone who ran for Congress from the Muslim American community, because we need more congressmen, we need more state legislators, we need more people on school boards, we need more people who go into journalism. You guys, the people, a lot of Muslim Americans are immigrant communities from South Asia, the Middle East, and they insist that their kids all become engineers and physicians. Well, that's good, engineers and physicians, those are good occupations. But if you've got 3 kids, make one of them become a journalist and end up replacing Wolf Blitzer on CNN. Because if you don't do that, you don't have a So one of the things the community is going to have to do is to become more active. I'm not here to engage in politics, so I don't want to give you directions in this regard, but I can only say that if someone did to me what Peter King did to the Muslim American community the other day, the next time that Peter King ran for office, I'd send off a check to his opponent. And you can do this across state lines. You don't have to be a helpless victim. Finally, with regard to pluralism, it is communities like the American Muslim community that make American democracy possible. Now, why do I say that? It might be thought of as kind of a weird thing to say. Did we have democracy just fine before there were Muslim Americans? Well, the fact is that James Madison didn't think democracy was possible in a big country. In the 18th century, there was this huge intellectual fight among people about whether you could have democracy. And Napoleon Bonaparte, I wrote a book about his invasion of Egypt. In one of his letters, he says, it's ridiculous. At that time, the population of France was 25 million. He says, it's ridiculous to think about having a democracy in a country of 25 million. So we all know what Bonaparte did about that problem. He decided to go for being emperor instead. And James Madison and other founding fathers of the United States had similar concerns, because democracy was thought of, well, the Athenians had it. But Athens at that time was a village, and we're all talking about a few tens of thousands of people. So could you take a form of government that grew up in a small place that was really about small towns and villages. And could you apply that to a country of then, well, the United States began as 4 million or so. And Madison wasn't sure. And how did Madison become convinced that you could have a democracy in a big place? Well, he read an essay by Hume. And that essay convinced him that here's an analogy you might make. If you had a mansion with lots and lots of rooms in it, and you had one person who had the key to all the rooms, then he'd be the master of the mansion. That would be a dictatorship. But if you had a mansion that had lots and lots of rooms, and there were lots of people in the mansion, but not every one of them had a key to all of the rooms, then they'd have to cooperate with each other to open the doors. And that's what Madison came up with, was checks and balances. Not everybody should, not any one individual, not any one group should have a key to all the rooms in the house. As frustrating as it is for the Senate to have these rules about wanting to get a consensus and 60 votes for major issues and so forth, but it's a Madisonian principle. No one party should just be allowed to ride roughshod over the others. Not one party should have the keys to all the rooms in the mansion. So pluralism is a way of keeping some keys out of the hands of some people. And the United States has benefited enormously from pluralism. We wouldn't have our First Amendment rights to free speech that we now have, and which some people are trying to erode, if it weren't for pluralism, because it is that different communities interpreted this right to free speech differently that generated lawsuits and pushed the courts to expand the range of freedom of speech, because, you know, in the 18th and 19th century, even after World War I, there were very substantial curbs on freedom of speech that were challenged in the courts. And who challenged them? Well, it was the labor unions, and it was Jewish Americans, and it was African Americans, and it was communities of interest that organized to press for a more wide-ranging understanding of American liberties that caused those liberties to be entrenched and expanded. So our understanding of First Amendment rights now is not the same as it was in 1796 when there was an Alien and Sedition Act. I mean, it was illegal to be seditious. Howard Zinn, the great historian, said that dissidence is the highest form of patriotism. Well, that principle got enshrined in American law through struggle. And it is the pluralism of America that allows it to be more democratic. And if you look at countries that are ethnically and religiously monochrome, often they don't have as many rights because it's just assumed. We're all in this together. We're all the same. Why would we need to protect anybody in particular? That we have minorities is why we need protection. And it's not just that the Muslim American community plays this role, but each of the major communities plays this role, whether they're communities of occupation or class, whether they're communities of faith. The Roman Catholic Americans have made tremendous contributions to pluralism in the United States, and in fact, the freedom of religion that we have was pushed for by Catholic Americans, and in the 19th century you had something called the Know Nothing movement, which wasn't deliberately ignorant. Nowadays we have some politicians that are deliberately ignorant who could call them Know Nothing in that sense. Maybe take pride in not knowing the difference between Lexington, Connecticut, and Lexington, Massachusetts. But nevertheless, there is a movement called the Know Nothings, which was a conspiracy. They didn't know anything because the police interrogated them. They didn't know anything about it. And it was a conspiracy of rigid and fanatical Protestant Americans who attacked Catholics. There was a church in Philadelphia, which was a Roman Catholic church that was founded in the late 1790s, and to which George Washington gave a contribution, just to demonstrate that Catholics had freedom of religion in the United States. It was burned down in Philadelphia in the early 1840s by the nunneries. So you don't, the United States has wonderful ideals enshrined in its laws and its Constitution, but in actual fact, people have been denied their rights. The churches have been burned down. Native Americans weren't allowed to practice their religion. It was illegal to practice Native American religion until 1973. So Muslim Americans are in the mix of American pluralism, and we will benefit as Americans from having them here only if they're active, only if they assert their rights, only if they get involved in American institutions. And let me leave you with a couple of thoughts. First of all, the Muslim American presence in the United States now numerically is large, and Muslim Americans are visible in a way that they haven't been in much of American history. But there's a hidden history of a Muslim American presence in North America on two fronts. Enormous numbers of African slaves were brought to North America starting in the 1500s. And many of them were brought from Nigeria and Senegal and Mali. They were Muslims. And we have a couple of Arabic accounts of Muslim notables who were enslaved and brought to the Carolinas. Slave labor helped build the White House. And we think about 10% of slaves were Muslim from Africa. So some of the White House probably was built by Muslim Americans. They're not new here. They did interviews with with African Americans in the 1930s, oral histories, sort of what happened to them after they were emancipated from slavery. And some of these interviews elicit the information that older African Americans in the 1930s could remember their mothers getting up in the morning and bowing to the east. And they hadn't known why they were doing that. Those were Muslim mothers that they remembered their rituals. And that didn't get passed on to the next generation because African Americans were deprived of their African culture quite deliberately. On the other hand, Spain was ruled by Muslims for 800 years. And in 1492, two big things happened. North America was discovered, or at least by the Europeans, and also the Muslims began being expelled from Spain. But hundreds of thousands of them declined to leave. Many of them had gone to Morocco or Algeria or even to Turkey, but some stayed. And they were forced to convert by the Inquisition to Catholicism. But they continued to practice Islam secretly, as did many Jews. And many Spanish Muslim converts, who were not really very much converts, felt it uncomfortable in Spain. And when the New World opened up, many of them went to the New World. And so it's not an accident that the dialect of Spanish spoken in Latin America is closest to Andalusia, which was the area the Muslims were in. So if you look at the names of a lot of the Spanish who came to the New World and settled in what is now New Mexico and California and so forth, their names start with A-Al. I was born in Albuquerque, and I couldn't prove it, but I think that's probably an Arabic word. There were people of Muslim heritage in the American Southwest as well as an integral part of American history. And the Andalusians brought with them irrigation techniques that had been pioneered by the Arab Muslims in southern Spain, technological things that had to do with the Muslim world, and so forth. So both from Africa and from Spain, Muslims have had a presence or a legacy in the New World for a long time. Since 1965 and the abolition of the old racist immigration laws, they've started to emerge as a large community again in the United States that this time is visible. And I think the Founding Fathers would have been very happy about this. You may ask me why I say the Founding Fathers, because that wasn't a time when Islam was very visible in the United States. But Benjamin Franklin, in his autobiography, said that he wanted to found an interfaith building in Philadelphia where people could come and preach their ideas, religious ideas, from any background. Quakers, Roman Catholics, Jews. And Benjamin Franklin said in his autobiography, he said explicitly, and if the Mufti from Constantinople, that is to say Istanbul, were to come and preach to us, I am sure we would be edified by what he had to say. Myself, I think the Muslim community of Philadelphia should invite the Mufti from Turkey to come and give him a Benjamin Franklin Award. We should follow through on some of these Enlightenment ideas that the Founding Fathers had. George Washington once wrote a letter, he said he needs some workmen. And the man wrote back and said, well, what kind of workmen do you need? And I think George, was fighting a war and he was a little bit impatient. This was 1782. He said, well, I don't really care so much, what kind of workers you get me. They could be Asiatics, Muslimans, they could be, anything you like, just as long as they can do the work. So he was perfectly happy to think about hiring Muslim workers. Tom Jefferson said that we shouldn't care so much about what religion other Americans have. He said, if my neighbor believes in one God or no God or many gods, doesn't break my leg, doesn't pick my pocket. And that is the true American spirit of the Founding Fathers, which Muslim American community exemplifies. Thank you very much.
So, if anyone has a question, please come to the mic and direct it to the speaker. I guess, you do have a question. Dr. Abbasi. I like to call all other Dr. Abbasis and their family as the other Dr. Abbasis. Hamada? Question for Hamada, please? Yeah.
To some of us who do not have so much knowledge about the finding of the chaplain and the psychiatrist,
you need microphone.
To us it looks like it's a lot bigger issue than what was presented because there are many areas of conflict. So before we even create something on a common ground, how do you feel or how do you think some of those differences or conflicts could be addressed or will be addressed?
Can you repeat the question?
So the question was about developing kind of programs and this professionalization of Islamic chaplaincy. There's kind of inherent conflicts with psychiatry, and there's kind of the implied there's kind of a long road ahead of us. And how do we start? Well, I mean, some of that we've kind of started already, in the sense that I'm involved in training the Islamic chaplains at Harper Seminary, and we'll be getting involved pretty soon as well. And so we're trying to educate, and actually there has been a learning curve for me of getting feedback from the Islamic chaplain students about their own concepts of mental health and whatnot. So I think it starts with this training. The Islamic chaplaincy endorsing body has invited me to serve on their National Advisory Board. So that communication has started. I think much of it's going to start the entry point is going to be the training. And so when the psychiatrists and psychologists, mental health professionals are training Islamic chaplains, then those differences are going to be addressed.
At this point, I would like to acknowledge Brother Mahmoud Musa from Islamic Center, East Lansing Islamic Center, and I would like for you to say a few words. I appreciate you being here. And also Brother Tassim Sadar, thank you for coming from Islamic Center. And if you have a question, if you raise your hand, we now have a mobile mic that we can bring.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, shalom, salam. Thank you, Dr. Farha, for that excellent program that we've been attending for many years now, and hopefully it will continue. And the diversity that brings to the program is very important. We at the Islamic Center here acknowledge the efforts and the facts that you have been talking about. Dr. Ahmed has given a good overview about what Muslims and the challenges are facing the Muslim youth. And we need to learn and work on that. And all topics, and the Imam is a very critical issue actually. And that question is so important for us. We right now we don't have an imam in our community, and we're thinking of having an imam. And that criteria and the job description of the imam has been taking so much, because one of the challenges that we usually face, if you want to bring an imam who is good in Islamic knowledge, then most probably he is not born here. And if you want to bring an imam who is familiar with the culture, who knows how to deal with the youth, who knows how to deal with people here, then you really may not get the strongest Sharia. With all apologies to the imams who are existing here, I don't know, but I'm talking about our own experience actually here. So there is a long way to go. One of the other challenges actually that we're facing, and we need to see that coming, hopefully in the coming discussion, is really how can we diversify our resources? How can we include or raise more of our youth to study journalism, to study law, study other social subjects, so will be effective in the community. I know for sure, including, many of us, you want to direct your children to certain jobs, and that isolate us to a great extent from the bigger community, and hopefully that will be addressed in the long run. Appreciate the work. I was not actually prepared to say anything, but thank you for letting me talk.
So we have one question. Can you announce your name also?
My name is Margaret Keeler, and I'm the president of NAMI Lansing, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And NAMI is the largest grassroots organization that's dedicated to research, advocacy, and education for families who are dealing with mental illness in their family. And I just want to say to all of the four previous speakers that there is a lot that can be done on the grassroots level, and I think a lot of engagement at the grassroots level is very needed, and we are hoping that we can expand in a multicultural way, because it's very much needed. And so I invite anybody to come by to our table over there and get information, because we do provide a lot of education. In fact, if an imam cannot go to a center to get educated, we do have evidence-based programs, 12-week classes for families that are available at the grassroots level, and folks have come from all over to benefit from these classes. So I thank you for this wonderful conference. Thank you.
I would encourage all of you to check out our vendors tables. We also have Elite Healthcare, which provides culturally sensitive healthcare. We have NAMI, we have ISPU, and we also, I would like to mention Steve Olvey from Bond Institute. Steve, can you tell us a few things about yourself? He's right there, Steve. Just quickly about your Bond Institute.
Just very quickly, we have some material on the table back here by UP actually. It's about an international conference that we began in 2009 in Michigan. It's one of several conferences that we do in the United States and other countries. This particular one is based in Michigan. It's on religion, conflict, and peace. Very much apropos to what is being spoken about here today in many ways. And actually, Farah has been in our conference program last year and this year. I'd like to encourage you to pick up a flyer, just become familiar with it, and hopefully what we can do is we can build on the good work that you're doing here, the work that many of us are trying to do in Michigan, throughout the country, and internationally too. This is a global issue, really. We feel it in the United States and the society, but it really is a human issue. And that's all I want to say. You could gather information. If you'd like to learn more details, you can talk to me.
We have one question. Yeah. Hi.
About a month and a half ago, the Islamic Center of America in Dearborn, as you may have heard it on television, was almost bombed by an individual in California who had a car full of M80s and other kinds of high-density firecrackers. And he was apprehended by the City of Dearborn police. Someone had overheard a conversation with this individual. Homeland Security asked us to not go into too much publicity. It didn't serve their purposes, that the individual had a criminal record, etc., etc. And they asked us as a community not to go too far to the public. They're on. April 22nd, the Quran-burning pastor from Florida, Terry whatever his name is coming on Good Friday to demonstrate in front of the Islamic Center, and he is encouraging other like-minded Americans to bring their American flag and demonstrate in front of the Islamic Center. Now, the reason I bring these things up, it's not a benign situation in the United States. Muslims all over this country are being put in positions that have to affect them psychologically, emotionally, and we have that problem right now in Dearborn. There's a board meeting tomorrow morning to deal with this April 22nd situation, and the best thing we can come up with is to invite them in for a meal. I'd like to hear some of the speakers a little more pertinently on that, because these threats do have an effect on the young people and the elders and Muslims in general, and yet you don't really hear a lot about them. I'm looking around here, and I don't think too many of you knew that the April 22nd event was taking place. Any comments by any of the speakers?
The purpose of doing these conferences exactly is to identify that, bring it to the notice of other community members. 9/11 was a very traumatic incident, but we forget that it's a shared trauma, and if we have a security, then it's a shared security goal. We need to remember that there is no individual security. Either we come together and prosper, or this conflict is just going to go deep. And yes, that's the point we constantly make, that we are seeing an increase in post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety and depression. So, and hopefully, if we have a network of the community where social workers, therapists, organizations like NAMI, local Islamic centers, psychiatrists, universities, because I keep reiterating this. This is not a war on terrorism. This is a war of ignorance. And only way we can win this war is by education, education, education. Sorry, Muhammad Ayub.
I'm Muhammad Ayub from Michigan State University. I have a comment question which is inspired by the presentations by Dr. Samira Ahmed and Dr. Hamada Hamid. But before I go into that, let me wear my hat as the director of the Muslim Studies program at MSU and do some PR for it. We have a couple of major events coming up very soon. Our fifth annual conference of the Muslim Studies program will be held, and there are brochures out there, flyers out there, on April 7th and 8th. The topic of the conference is Beyond Islamic Studies, De-Essentializing the Study of Muslim Societies. And we have a group of very eminent scholars of Islamic studies and social scientists who work on the Muslim world for the conference. The keynote address will be given by an extremely eminent professor of Islamic studies and of religious studies, Professor Bruce Lawrence from Duke University, who will speak about Muslim cosmopolitanism in the age of globalization. As a pre-conference event on the evening of April 6th, we have Professor Mansoor Muaddal from Eastern Michigan University speaking at the MSU Library at 7 o'clock on April 6th on Islam and peaceful change in the Middle East, a very relevant topic, Islam and peaceful change in the Middle East, a comparison of Egypt and Iran. And incidentally, on September 15th, the university as a whole, Michigan State University as a whole, is planning a very major event as a part of the 10th anniversary commemoration of the tragic events of 9/11, 2011. It will be a major symposium on the war on terror 10 years on. And we have a number of leading experts on the subject on the war on terror and on the Muslim world who will be participating in that. But that's in September. But the comment that I wanted to make, or the question that I wanted to raise, and this, as I was listening to the presentations, came to my mind, is the issue of defining national identity, of defining identity, or Muslim identity within the United States. Particularly for the generations that have been born here and who speak with very pronounced American accents. And I think it's a responsibility of the older generation to coach them or help them in resolving the tensions that underlie their attempt to come to grips with the issues of identity. For immigrant Muslims, of the first generation, it's a very different world that they lived in. But for those who have grown up here and will grow up here, it's essential that they understand, and I've actually written a paper for the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding on this, and Dr. Hamid has read it, where I raised this issue that they must come to grips with this problem of defining themselves not as Muslims who happen to live in America, but as Americans who practice the Islamic faith. And this is a very important issue, and I've been struggling with this not at a personal level, because I know who I am, but at an intellectual level. Because as a student of politics, as a student of political science, I realize very clearly that the nation state is a very jealous mistress. And if you do not give it what it thinks is its due in terms of how you define your identity, it will create enormous problems. So at least, if not your exclusive identity, your primary identity should be defined in such a way that it allows for seamless integration into the wider American society. And I just wanted your response to that.
So I wear several hats. I wear my ISPU hat, my clinical neuroscientist hat. I won't put on my hat as the American Muslim, the guy who you're alluding to, a second-generation person who grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a Michigan man. I want to say that, your question brings in a lot of, it's a complex question, there's a lot of levels to this. I'm sure Samir will add to this. And as I was growing up in Ann Arbor, first of all, we had a Muslim youth group. And so as Samir talked about, there needs to be space for Muslim youth to kind of engage and kind of develop their own peer group. But also, centers like the one Farhad's trying to develop, the Muslim Mental Health Center, it will play an instrumental role in Muslim youth identity. Because when I was growing up, there were all sorts of charismatic Islamic leaders. For me, it was ISNA, provide people like Abdullah Idris. But you also had locally Sherman Jackson. And Sherman Jackson's, for those of you guys might know, Dr. Sherman Jackson is an Islamic studies professor at University of Michigan, who is also a public intellectual and imam, and really speaks quite frequently at kind of Muslim gatherings, both academically as well as kind of in the community. And his work was really to kind of talk about Islam in America, American Islam. And he kind of intellectually created space, both intellectually as even like religiously, created space for Muslims to feel comfortable that there's not conflict between, that Islam, his famous line was, the antithesis of the West is not Islam. The antithesis of the West is East. And so Islam is not in conflict with the West necessarily. It's not an inherent conflict. And so that kind of leadership in public space that Sherman Jackson provided, it was very central to Muslim youth. Sherman Jackson happens to be leaving Michigan pretty soon. But hopefully we'll have other kind of public intellectuals that kind of are employed by centers such as the one in Muslim Affairs Center at Michigan State that can kind of provide youth with leadership, intellectual leadership, as well as theological leadership, while from the ground up we develop these Muslim youth groups so that we can kind of have these conversations. But Samir is the Muslim youth expert, so I hear what she says about it.
So as I understand, the question is about identity and how to integrate the identity. And so in addition to Dr. Jackson, there's also Dr. Tariq Ramadan, who's actually going to be coming to the University of Michigan for a discussion on bioethics and integration of those issues. And what he talks a lot about is the issue of identity and how one of the things we need to realize is as long as we continue the discussion of us versus them, there will always be an us versus them. And Muslim Americans really need to understand that they're part and parcel of society, and they need to integrate and be part of part of society and culture. And I think Dr. Cole talked a little bit about this, as well as Andre Carson talked about the fact of how it's very important. We need to get in touch with our neighbors and interact with them, and not have this ghettoized mentality, and how being involved in school boards and public activities and all of that needs to take place. So in terms of, from a youth perspective now, one of the things that I think the gentleman back there had asked about, what exactly is going to happen, what is the response, April 22nd. And for me, as someone who does work directly with young people in volunteer capacity beyond my academic hat, we take these opportunities as excellent character building experiences. These are opportunities where you can engage young people and say, okay, so we have this person coming in, how can we use this as a great opportunity to learn more about your identity, how to integrate and interact with this individual, and what can we learn? And so you start a discussion that is related to, that may start off as us versus them, but you help them connect with the humanity of this individual. How might he develop such ideas, and that goes to Daniel's talk earlier, to understand how do stereotypes develop? How do people get stuck in this understanding of this us versus them? And so you work with them to help them gain an understanding of these issues, and then you help empower them by providing them opportunities. Okay, you can engage in, the individual directly. You can attend the public meetings that they may have in your board. You can increase awareness. There are many different opportunities, because when you create those opportunities, you're then channeling their energy. And as you channel their energy, they're no longer feeling as a victim who can't do anything about it. And I think those are the things that we need to do with young people, and that will help clarify their identity, as opposed to sitting in the masjid doing nothing and playing the victim role. And I think going back to the whole issue of identity, that process of development is extremely important for young people to grow from these experiences.
I didn't believe we have any more questions.
I just wanted to add that being a patriotic American and a practicing Muslim can be synonymous, so can complement each other.
My name is Salman Reis. I have a question for Professor Cole. I appreciate his work. One, what is the historic origin for the word Islamophobia, the fear from Islam? Not when there is no other phobia related to any other religion. And second, about the book engaging the Muslim world, when we are engaging them collectively as a Muslim world, while they have individually differences too, do you think engaging them being Muslim together and at the same level with their individual issues will be equally important?
Sure.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. With regard to the term Islamophobia, I have to admit I don't like it very much. It comes from Britain. And it's on the model of, I suppose, those other phobias. I mean, phobia just means fear in Greek, but it has a connotation of irrational fear. So, a phobia of something that can't really harm you. And nevertheless, you're very afraid of it. So I think it emerged in this post-war British context where, there are about 1.7 million Muslims in Britain, a country of only about 61 million people. And they're disproportionately urban. So if you're in London, the Muslim community in the UK boasts large. And as you know, the British National Party and even elements of other parties have for some time expressed some fear of the community. And Britain, unlike the United States, suffers from bad relations between the Muslim community and the general white Christian community. They're residentially segregated. They're working class for the most part, and very disproportionately working class. And Britain is not a society in which it's so easy to break barriers and rise high and so forth. Margaret Thatcher was a shopkeeper's daughter, and when she became prime minister, they sent her to take voice lessons because she had the wrong accent for a prime minister. So even a British person had their markers of social status are much more rigid in the United States. So Muslims are excluded in so many ways from public life in Britain. And if you look at opinion polling, like whatever the British foreign policy is, just take that and put it through a mirror, make it the opposite, and that's the foreign policy favored by the Muslim UK community. So they're really politically very alienated. And it's in that context that this phrase Islamophobia was promulgated and now has become more widely used. So I think its value is that it it does emphasize the irrational character of the fear, but its disadvantage is that it focuses on Islam as a religion as opposed to Muslims, and I think that I tend to speak about anti-Muslim prejudice, which is what it is. It's just discrimination or prejudice against Muslims, but that's a long word, and editors like short or at least compact words. It's a long phrase. With regard to Engaging the Muslim World, which is my most recent book, and a revised paper edition just came out in October, I think that obviously it's organized by chapters, and there's Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Iran and Iraq and Pakistan are individual chapters. So obviously engagement by the United States political foreign policy elite does have to happen on the basis of nation states. But it is also the case that Muslims are organized as Muslims. So I don't know of anything like this, but there's an organization of the Islamic Conference, which was founded after an attempt to burn down the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem in 1969. And it brought together the foreign ministers of the Muslim majority states in the world, who meet regularly, in conjunction with NGOs. So I don't know of a regular meeting of the foreign ministers of the Christian majority countries. So it seems to me that there is some value in thinking about the Muslim world as a unit of engagement, simply because they themselves seem to network and organize on that basis. And of course, you can't imagine differences in the practice of Islam between village Indonesia and rural Morocco. So it's not that they're all the same. But nevertheless, there are some commonalities, and there's obviously a political salience to the concept of Islamic politics that I think does make it worthwhile engaging with them across the board. And I think it's too often the case that when Americans think about Islam or Islam in foreign policy, they have a very narrow view of it, so they're thinking like of the Taliban in Afghanistan. And as we all know, I mean, that's a very weird cult-like movement that's not representative of Islam in the general world. So it's worthwhile getting them to think more widely, and I think it's been all to the good that they got to see Cosmopolitan Cairo on the news recently, because it's a different image of Islam than they've been getting. Thank you.
We have time for just one quick question. You get it? One? Okay. Oh, okay. Maybe we will continue, because I see we are very honored to have a another big personality here, Dr. Akbar. He's a